Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Resources Webinar 2, Federal Personnel Contractor Ordering and FMD Vaccine Requests. Please note that all participant lines will be muted until the Q&A portion of today's call, and we will provide you with instructions on how you may ask a verbal question at that time. You are welcome to submit written questions throughout the presentation, and these will be addressed during Q&A. To send a note, please select All Panelists on the Send To drop-down menu of your chat panel, which is located on the lower right-hand side of your screen. If you require technical assistance, you may send a private note to the event producer. And with that, I'll turn the call over to Liz Clark. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Clark with the Professional Development Services Branch, and I'd also like to thank you for joining us today for this webinar. We have two speakers today. Dr. Zack is a graduate of University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine. John was a large animal and equine practitioner before joining the APHIS Veterinary Services in 2002. He served as a district veterinary medical officer and area veterinarian in charge and is currently the director of the National Preparedness and Incident Coordination Center. His preparedness activities include the Secure Food Supply Plan and the Foreign Animal Disease Preparedness and Response Plan. Dr. Fred Bourgeois is a veterinarian with the USDA APHIS Vet Services, FERS, National Preparedness and Incident Coordination staff, located in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Fred is the Emergency Management Response System National Coordinator. He supports veterinary services and the state field operations in the development and utilization of EMRS for routine FAD and outbreak control activities, along with the EMRS IT team, 3 EMRS staff specialists, and more than 30 network associates. And with that, I will pass the webinar over to John.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this resource webinar. I'm going to start with, which is hopefully some high-level discussion that you can all agree around and recognize for those who have participated in other animal disease responses and or exercises. I think that, as we prepared for ARMOR, we really tried to break down the strategic things that we need to do, as well as the tactical things that we need to do, as well as the operational things that we need to do. And when you think about resources and all the types of resources that are in need for FAD outbreak, and God forbid, an FMD outbreak, other than, how you organize yourselves, how the things that you need, that you source yourselves, the 4 big criteria of things that we have identified for FMD that will be needed, at least from, APHIS and the USDA, are the National Veterinary Stockpile catalog items, things that the stockpile keeps in their warehouses and has with their contractors for, indefinite quantity, indefinite delivery. And I know many of you are probably familiar with the NVS catalog and how to receive goods from the NVS, how to request them. So that's one main thing that APHIS and Veterinary Services has provided historically and continues to provide. The other category of things that the National Veterinary Stockpile and APHIS have provided historically are contracted services. So that's like a second bucket of things that can be requested from APHIS, but they come more in the forms of a contracted service that can be provided. And in the past, we've used, some of the national contracting entities as well as some local contracting entities. But that's the second big category of items. The third category of items is that as the state and the district, the VS supporting district personnel are there, respond to anything, as the state IMT and or the state and APHIS or veterinary services IMT forms and there's identified need for additional personnel to work either in the incident management team at that structure level, or for the field responders that report to the incident management team. We then have the process for ordering personnel that would be coming from initially, veterinary services, also potentially from the APHIS, Voluntary Emergency Ready Response Corps, which we hear referred to as the VERC. So that third category of items would be the, what we would call, government personnel that could be dispatched to support a state in whatever role is needed, and we have defined through position catalogs here at APHIS and IMT org charts here at VS, working with all of you at the state, the different types of positions that might be needed. Some are broad, like veterinary medical officer, others are much more specific in terms of the actual field function or strike team function that would be needed. So the broad category of personnel that would come either through veterinary services folks, APHIS folks, and or temporary hires or other type hires is that third category of resources that might be needed. And then for the last category, we anticipate for an FMD response, and is kind of a new category for us, would be foot and mouth disease vaccine. So it's a complicating factor because in terms of for those who are skilled or practiced, experienced in ordering resources, that you need to define whether it's a catalog item, a contractor, services, GS personnel or personnel that you need, or vaccine. There's the element of what is the process to submit that request, and we use, NIMS and ICS structures and incident management team and incident command structures, so we know that we're going to use the 213RR to submit and request all these resources. But, just in the past, we've done exercises where folks have requested FMD vaccine, and it's a little bit more complicated than that, than just putting down, I need, 10,000 doses or 100,000 doses or 1 million doses. There are some basic questions around what is the intention for the use of that vaccine, how much do you think you need right away, what species are you going to use it in, are you using it for a suppressive vaccination approach or for a vaccinate-to-live approach, what is your dose schedule, what is going to be your methodology for tracking the vaccinates, and what is your long-term plan? Are these animals then intended for vaccinate to slaughter or intended for vaccinate to live for several years based upon where you're at in that response? So that's kind of a new category, and specifically for that, we had developed a vaccine request form. It's a fillable Word document, and that's been distributed now several times. We've updated it several times based on comments, but it's not meant to be a burdensome tool at all. It's meant to accompany whatever 213RR request is that will request, the number of the vaccine, where is it supposed to go, kind of the nuts and bolts of logistics. We do need to have a planning element around that vaccine request. So rather than just, leave an ill-defined or a non-defined approach for the states to have to come up with their initial vaccine request, we did come up with that FMD vaccine request form. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, or your staff that might be involved in doing that request. We would encourage them to look at that, not only for this exercise, but this is something that we want to continue on with and develop for, our actual FMD responses, potentially, God forbid again, beyond this exercise if we ever are, confronted with this. And we would probably use the same type of vaccine request form for other diseases, maybe such as whatever it might be, CSF or another vaccine might be available. So it's an attempt to modernize our approach to responding to some FADs and then trying to harmonize the resource request with some of the brain work, planning work, intelligence work that needs to go around that resource request. Just briefly, I think on your screen right now was a summary of the updated resource ordering processes. And again, this basically is just showing how, veterinary services and APHIS is going to be categorizing the resources requests that will be coming in, how we're going to track these resources, manage these resources requests. In some cases, these resources, for the catalog items are pretty much tried and true established processes. We were just looking for some ways to better correlate or be able to run reports for NVS catalog items that come in from multiple states. Again, for the ARMOR exercise, we'll be simulating 6 states playing as opposed to a single state playing. So if you're in an incident management team or the ICS structure, nothing has really changed about ordering resources. I think internally to veterinary services and APHIS, we have been modernizing consistently since 2015. Our approach is to, tracking the resources, filling the resources, and managing these resources requests. We're going to use our EMRS system to help manage these requests, and our incident management teams have been doing this for our last several responses for high-pathic eye. So we've had the ability to test some of these things on single-state type outbreaks, and this ARMOR exercise will be a good exercise for us to test our processes on a multiple state outbreak. Again, I think the broad categories of resources are, again, going to be the NVS catalog items, the NVS contracted services, personnel, and then FMD vaccine. I think the one other document, I'll just pull up quickly here, is this emergency FMD vaccine request and initial plan for vaccine campaign. I'm sorry, the screen here went blank, so I don't know what happened to my I don't know if folks can see that, this document.
John, we are viewing the Word document.
Okay, thank you. So I don't want to read these things to you. I just wanted to, basically have them there. They've been sent to you by email. But this one I'll just go through a little bit, is that we all know that, an FMD response in some ways is going to be very complex, and in some ways it'll be very simple. Basically, we're going to try to depopulate, if we can, where we can, to stop the virus production. In some cases, the scale and scope of the premises may result in some delays in population or an inability to populate potentially. We also understand, depending upon the size and scope of the outbreak, whether we depopulate alone of the true stamping out policy, or if we have to modify the stamping out policy with either vaccinate to kill, vaccinate to slaughter, or vaccinate to live strategies, that, the states will have to, realistically evaluate what their capabilities are with their own resources, with the resources that are available, from USDA and APHIS and other federal agencies, and in terms of what is the overall best approach for the response. So along those lines, that's where this new document or request comes in. Basically, this is a table for your planners to try to think of how much doses they might need for the different types of species. That's in that, that part one, that table. And then the rest of it basically just has fillable blanks for some basic questions around FMD vaccine in terms of, estimate the number of doses, the doses you think you would need to do for, a 2-week time frame, a 3-month time frame, a 6-month time frame, as well as, what are your basic goals for this vaccination campaign? Is it vaccinate to kill, slaughter, live? And and we understand that, your plan on week 1 of an outbreak might very well change by week 5 of an outbreak or 3 of an outbreak. So we understand that, things change and the actual, vaccine request or vaccine plan may change, but this is some way of getting rapidly, quickly standardizing requests across states so that we can, take these vaccine requests, both in terms of policy and the resource allocation, and best figure out how to fill these requests. In addition, I think that, this exercise will also be helpful. We've had a lot of discussions nationally about what is the appropriate size of the United States FMD vaccine bank. This exercise and scenario will provide another opportunity to get empirical data, empirical evidence, empirical knowledge about what the state animal health officials and their staffs think might be needed for an appropriate quantity of vaccine to deal with at least the situation or scenario that's presented here, for this exercise of an FMD outbreak. So I think that Liz wanted to take questions at the end. I didn't want to take any more time away from Fred and his presentation. So I think I'll stop there and turn it over back to Liz or turn it over to Fred.
Okay, Fred, you have presenting rights, so you can start.
Okay, good morning, everyone. As John said, we've been through a number of different outbreaks here, scenarios, and so my team was tasked with trying to come up with a method to pull all of this together, because in the past we've done a number of different ways. We've had personnel orders go in that then couldn't be filled or couldn't be routed. We had, MVS and vaccine orders going over the phone, getting captured where it's visible for all parties. We've had, supplies being ordered locally, and trying to pull that all into one place where we can do something with that and look at it on a, overall picture and report up the chain what we're spending the money on and what's being requested and where we're short on items has been a challenge. So this is a method to try and pull all that information together. So we've done this past, and why are we doing it now? And John covered some of this. Trying to pull all those multiple methods into one method, better tracking and removing the duplicates, because we were filling duplicate orders that were being sent different ways, and it was really difficult to manage that information. More secure information, better auditing for our OIG audits, and saying who approved this and how to approve, because there's been times where we said, well, who approved, sending that group out? And well, somebody did, and it's really hard to follow up on who made that decision. So we're trying to eliminate that. And again, being that we're distributed now, a lot of times the IMTs, the ICG, some of this stuff needs to depend on how big and how much it's going to cost. There needs to be some additional approvals done, not just at the IMT level, and those physical separations have presented some challenges. So we're trying to make that a little better. More of a real-time processing, better cost control, and better documentation are really a lot of the reasons that we're doing that. And there's a workflow, and we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here and change the workflow that's already in place. What we're trying to do is capture what's already in place, and believe it or not, most all of these requests have very similar type business side workflows. There's somebody puts in the request, somebody has to do some approvals at the IMT level depending on the type of the request. It may or may not have to flow up to the ICG or someone for some additional approvals. Then at some point where it says, okay, it's this request, and this is a resource request. This is not an order. This request is approved for ordering. At that point, usually the IMT, resource logistics person takes over and actually places the order, but for lack of better words, all the pre-approvals are pretty much done at that point and things can move forward. So we're not changing that process, we're just trying to capture that process. So what we try to do is start off before the incident. We'll create the main categories, 4 main categories of requests that we've broken this down into. The NVS catalog items, and that allows us to put a lookup in there, and we've covered this on another webinar, so I won't get into detail there, but we can pull the catalog items in, and going through the catalog and trying to write down those numbers on a hard copy and making sure you have the right thing gets difficult, so we've put that into a lookup. Personnel, where we can capture what are you asking for? You're asking for a team, you're asking for individual positions or whatever, and then we need to break that out once it's approved and somebody has said, okay, we want to source this from D1 or D2 or whatever. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes things that have to go on to process that personnel. Equipment, fleet, and supplies, we do expect at some point that, if this goes on, you get a local warehouse, and so you still have folks at the local level, operation-type folks that need to order things that they need for tomorrow. So this process is also available for them to say, I need these supplies, and I need to pick them up tomorrow at a certain time, so it can be used both at a local and a national basis. And then we also have facilities that need to be requested, and somebody needs to go out and get those facilities, and somebody needs to approve that. So all those categories are there. We have the pre-approvals, everything put in place to say where we need to route this and who needs to approve it. That helps us to kind of streamline that process. So what we've tried to do is replicate, we were talking about this at one time, and Greg Ramos said, well, what we need is something like, you get on Amazon. I need to have a cart to put my items in. And that really struck a nerve. It sounds like a good idea. So we had a process in place, but we kind of renamed and started thinking about that cart and putting items in that cart to kind of get people to understand you have a 213, which is your cart you create and say, I need a shopping cart needs to have NVS items in it. Then I go down the aisle and I pick up certain items and put them in that cart. That's our details. So we have that all broken out. You create from the master, you create the cart, and it captures all that information so you don't type all that in or what you're looking for. You're allowed to pick, do you want to have this delivered or picked up, or if it's personnel, report to a certain location. We tie that to any location in the system, so it may be specific premises that you're ordering for, which allows, like if it's supplies or equipment coming from NVS and you want that delivered to a specific premises, we can do that. If you have a staging area and you want it delivered there, you can tie it to that, or if you want it delivered to ICP, you can tie it to that. So it's flexible in that process of being able to pick the area that you want it, or place you want it to go to. There's some things, as John talked about vaccine and 3D, that's sort of new stuff that we've added to be able to capture that as well. It doesn't circumvent the process that NVS needs to do and the items they need, but we do have placeholders there for it. So if you're going to order a vaccine, that vaccine needs to be placed on a 213 by itself because it's going to have some offline processing, decision-making that goes into that. We've put in some reminders, so if you're ordering vaccine, it reminds you, hey, you need to attach the vaccine plan. And if you're ordering 3D services, it's going to say, hey, you need to attach an SOW because this is what they need. And it's just, think of it kind of as an electronic filing cabinet, a place to keep things. Instead of you going digging through your email, we're trying to put it all in one place where we can keep up with it. And we've tried to make it as easy as possible. So, again, the reminder, the vaccine goes on a 213 by itself. You don't put vaccine and then order equipment or, vaccination supplies all on a 213 because they need to make some offline decisions about the rest of that. The supplies you order can be processed and sent out without a lot of decision-making other than NVS. But the vaccine itself, you need to, that needs to have that vaccine plan and some decision-making. So go put that on a 213 by itself, as well as, hey, I'm asking for 3D services, and then and keep that pretty simple, say, 3D services, and then you explain in the SOW exactly what it is you're requesting from NVS. And again, they have processes already in place to handle all that. This is just electronically filing it in one place where we can keep up with it. If you're ordering other NVS items, then any other NVS items can mix and match on an NVS request. Personnel can include multiple positions as long as they're for the same location and the same time frame. Then equipment, fleet, and supplies, you can mix and match any of those three on a request, especially if all that's at the local level, because the local logistics chief is going to be putting all that together for you as well. And again, they can be tied to a single premises, staging area, or the ICP. So as you add the items to the cart when you go through, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You'll have categories of MVS items, and so you select vaccine, and we've just got a placeholder in for FMD vaccine by the dose. I didn't put in 100,000 doses, million doses. You put in how many doses you want. So if you were going to do some specific targeted vaccination at specific premises, then you can list the premises, you can order the vaccine, say I need 10,000, 100,000 doses, whatever. Or if you're ordering vaccine to go into a warehouse, you can say the warehouse is the location you want it delivered to and say 1 million doses or 2 million doses or whatever you want. It's flexible that way. And it's going to, again, check and ask you to make sure that vaccine plan is attached and warn you about that so you don't forget. If we're looking at 3D, kind of the same thing. You're going to have a category, NVS category that you click on that says contracted 3D services. Have a drop down that's going to be just a generic contracted 3D services as described per attached SOW. You need to put a little explanation in there of, what you're trying to do here. Is it, you need 3D for a 5,000 head dairy or a 50,000 head feed yard or 200 sow operation or something like that. Just a little description that we can display in a column. So when we're looking at this and running reports, we can say, well, here's all the requests. But the specifics are going to have to go in that SOW for NVS to be able to write the contract and do what they need to do. So this is just a short description, placeholder, capture this so it's in one place and we know where it's at. So the personnel request process behind the scenes is fairly complicated because there's a lot of checks and balances that have to go into place to make sure that an equitable distribution of resources occurs. So we, again, create from the master so you don't have to put all the data entry. You add, details. The details will be I need 5 VMOs, 5 HTs, whatever, 10 case managers. That kind of stuff would be the details on a request. The local IMT plans approves that. It's routed to them automatically for approval. It's routed to the IC for approval. If it's a type of item that needs to go up to the ICG because we're distributing resources across multiple states and come up to the ICG for approval, they're going to kick it back when they approve it to the local IMT logistics chief, who will then, we have a process, you basically push a button and it converts it into the resource orders at that point. Those resource orders then we send to EQS folks, and so once they receive it, they'll know that these approvals have been done so they can move forward with their work without having to worry about somebody's put in a request or an order and we don't know yet whether this is approved or how we distribute this. So it eliminates that. Once they receive that order, they can go to work trying to fill that order. They get those orders filled, they come back and we fill those in EMRS. So when those folks actually show up at the ICP location, we can check them in, create the rotations, start assigning them work, keep track of who's there, assign vehicles, equipment, all that to that rotation, and then when their rotation is done, we check them out. So again, this all follows pretty much the same process, no matter what you're ordering. We try to keep it very consistent and flexible. So you would go in from the personnel request, the master, create the 213, you kind of put some just light description in there so we can see just in a column at least a few things that tell us what this is all about, and we can differentiate one request from another. You can have those people report to a specific ICP location, and it will, you'll put that request in, and then after you put your 213 RR in, you get your 213 RR cart, and then you're going to add some items to that cart, which would be your detailed, I'm asking for 5 VMOs, and I'm asking for 5 VMOs to do surveillance work, and I'm asking for, 5 HTs that will be disposal group supervisors. and we have those positions in there, so you can get pretty specific about the positions, or you can be very generic. I need 5 VMOs for operations if that's what you want to order, and then, you know, parse them out later. We have all kind of approval notifications and prompts. So if people are in different places and they're around their computer, if someone puts in an order and needs the plan's approval, it's going to send we put those contacts in that master. And so if the system says, okay, this needs to go to the plans chief for approval, they have a contact there. They know where to, the system knows where to send that notification or that prompt for that person. They receive that prompt, they can just click on that prompt, drill to this particular one that's being asked, that they're being asked to approve, push the button, boom, it approves and puts their name in it, boom, and it immediately routes it to the next person on the approval list. So trying to automate much of that, yeah, we can carry the paper around, have everybody sign it and all that kind of stuff, or we can send you emails, you detach, you sign, you reattach, you send it to the next person. Trying to take a lot of that work out of it and keep it all within the system audited and not be going through email chains to try to figure this out. All that together then allows at the national level for us to be able to view all of the requests in one place and to have an overall operating picture going and to run reports so that we can, you know, John can go up the chain with this information and say, here's the requests we have, here's how many we've been able to fill, here's how many we're working on, here's how many that doesn't look like we're going to be able to approve because there's no resources, or, you know, here's what it's going to cost to get those resources, and go and obtain the money and the support to get all that done. So we have questions here, and I see some that have been sent in. I'll answer those first, if that's okay. Roger says, resource orders are submitted by either supply unit leader, logistics chief, or IC according to ICS. Does that individual need to already be an EMRS user? Resource orders, again, these are resource requests to start off with. A 213RR is a resource request. Anybody who enters a resource request needs to be an EMRS user. If you're a local person, a state person, and you're not an EMRS user, if you have an IMT or an EMRS network associate that can assist you, they can actually enter these requests for you. If you want to be able to enter those, then you need to be, yes, you need to be an EMRS user, because we track all of this based on who the user is and who's responsible. All the auditing, that who created it, who approved it, all of that is based on the EMRS user, yes. There's another question. When a vaccine request is submitted by a state, including an estimate of the number of doses needed, does the potential 2-week lag time to receive vaccine need to be considered in the needed estimate? Yeah,
so Fred, you know, so the current timeline chronology is that if we have an outbreak, once NVSL Fatal, Plum Island is able to do the vaccine, the virus sequencing, depending upon the virus and how quickly that goes, they can get the sequencing done very quickly and the vaccine matching based off historical knowledge quickly if it's one of the high-risk circulating virus types. That can happen very quickly in an outbreak over the first, day or two. Then from that time, depending upon if the vaccine is stored at Plum Island, I think we're starting to contract the vac storage for some of the vaccines. May not be in place yet, but some of the vac storage will actually be occurring over in Europe. The typical time to get the first 300,000 doses is about 5 to 7 days from when the vaccine is matched, and either the time that we send the APHIS and Veterinary Services FATL and the NVS sends the vac from Plum Island to the manufacturer to get it reconstituted the vaccine. The first 300,000 or so doses will take about 5 to 7 days to get. So that's kind of the current, chronology for getting that initial vaccine. Then the up to 2.5 million doses, again, some of this vaccine may need to be shared with Canada and Mexico, that 2.5 million vaccine. We basically have 70% of it. I think the Mexico officials have 20% of it, and the Canadian officials have 10% of it by, the current contractual arrangements. So it's a great question that, no, there won't be vaccine available day one of an outbreak, but based on the vaccine that the North American FMD Vaccine Bank holds, we also have some arrangements strategically around the world with a couple of our allies and their vaccine banks, so we would be exploring using some of their vaccine as well as needed. And then ultimately, I think, this exercise goes to help inform the discussion we're having nationally now, about what is the appropriate size and timelines and chronology for, the next generation of the U.S. FMD vaccine bank.
Okay, and the next question comes to us is, can you remind us about the flow of initiating a 213RR request? Who fills it out and submits the 213? Does that come from a state to local USDA? They submit it, or can a state fill out and submit the 213 on their own? 213s, if you're filling out a paper one, basically anybody can fill out a 213 paper, and that can be used all the way from a person doing field operations to the IC. But through this process, because we're trying to capture this in all in one place, in the MVS, you can fill out a hard copy and email it directly to them if that's what you want to do, but we're going to need to capture that. So we're going to have to back up and try to capture that. So what we're preferring is, and when you fill that out, is that if you're working with a local IMT, or you have a state user who has, been trained, has access, or you have a network associate available, that you give it to them so that they can enter it into the system at that point before you send it through an email. But we don't get duplicate requests and we don't get these out of sync. But if none of those options are available to you, then you fill out a hard copy and scribble on it and send it in. That's still an acceptable method. We just will have to capture that at some point above so that all gets pulled back together. But basically, if you go through this process, we've tried to standardize that to where those approvals that need to occur are occurring at the local level before it goes up to be considered by other folks. Also says, how is the state notified there may be a delay on a request or if it is denied? We have, when you put this in, if you put it in through EMRS, we ask if you want to receive process notifications. If you say yes, and you can list yourself and one other email address, which could be a group box or whatever for your state. As this moves through the process of being approved by plans or ops or whoever has to approve it, the IMC, PG, every time that approval changes, you will get a notification email telling you it's moved to the next stage. And then again, if it gets denied, you will be receiving notification as well. So that's the other thing we're trying to do, is cut down on the email traffic, cut down on the, hey, did you get my request and what are you doing with it? Are you working on it? We're trying to give you more feedback to where it makes it a more efficient process, hopefully. Next question is regarding personnel requests. Is there any advantage in submitting a separate 213 for field personnel versus IMT personnel? Normally, you would request your IMT first, and then when you get time, you get to replace an IMT. It probably is a nice little package to package your IMT request together. But there's not, other than that, there's no advantage. If you're ordering an IMT and you also need to order some IMT plus type positions or field personnel in addition to that, that's fine. You obviously don't want to, it gets a little bulky if you put in a 213. You've got 78 different requests on that one. It might make sense to submit one, whatever makes sense, whatever you would normally write up, whatever you normally do in your process of kind of packaging things that make sense together would probably be the way to go. The next question, how much you might modify a vaccine request that is already being processed in a rapidly changing FMD outbreak scenario? To what extent can we change our minds about the vaccination plan? Upscaling the initial request is very likely, for instance, so could a new request replace and cancel out an outdated request that has not been fielded yet? John, you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on that form, I think there's a place for you to submit for version control purposes, we expect, a state to submit potentially multiple versions of this. I mean, you may work up in-house what your triggers are, what your plan is. We know, and this is not a knock on anything, anyone, any part of the system, but we kind of understand the vaccine currently now is a scarce resource, potentially. If you get into an outbreak where, 300,000 doses and, after that first week or so, could be a tremendous amount of doses to actually administer in the field. But depending upon the size and scale of an outbreak, particularly a multi-state outbreak that was getting more toward, by the phases and types, was getting to be a type 3 or 4 type outbreak. We understand that, your vaccination plans, needs will change. I think there's a place on that form for the version control as to this is our first request or first, second, third, fourth, continuously, so that we fully expect both at the state level and nationally, depending upon how the outbreak goes, both for an exercise and in real life, that, plans will change. There will be pivot points and trigger points for maybe a different approach. So absolutely. I think that, what we're trying to do both here and we want to work with all of you is trying to define, more concretely now, maybe on a state basis, what are your concern areas? Your state and industry better than anybody. So, in some cases, you may have it down to either like a livestock market or a certain county or a certain, industry sector, that if that actually becomes infected, that, in your mind, that may trigger a different response or different needs than if it was like, let's say, not in those areas. So, I think what we're trying to work with all of you on is we understand that some of the things you do are static and some of the other things you do are dynamic. So what are the best ways of sharing information, tracking information, in terms of, the resource requests themselves, as well as some of the more strategic and tactical things we may need to do in terms of both thinking about vaccine as well as actually using vaccine. So I don't know if that answers that question. At least I'm trying to.
Okay, so the next question comes to us is, does each premises need its own 213, or can a request be submitted to cover multiple prems? So think about this, what would you normally do? Well, if we're talking about 3D services, then likely you're going to make that request for specific premises, because that SOW may be covering a specific premises, that contract that they're going to have to write and all that kind of stuff. Or things get bigger, maybe it's going to be multiple. That's going to be whatever. It's flexible. It can be either. But for things like, let's say you're ordering NVS catalog items, and maybe you're ordering cattle handling equipment and vaccine supplies or modules, then likely you're going to do that, and you're going to have that delivered to the ICP or staging area. So that will cover multiple premises. So you kind of just need to, and personnel obviously will be for multiple premises. So it just, whatever makes sense in the business world is how we want to do that. So if you're wanting, like in AI, where you're wanting a foamer delivered to a certain premises, then obviously you make that 213 for that premises. But if you're looking for some, like say, equipment to be delivered to a staging area, and then you're going to parse that out and move it from prem to prem as you use it, then you can do that either way.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that was a good answer. And my thought would be that, for any state, if you have, one IMT to start, if you end up with multiple IMTs, you may need to end up, having more of an area command type approach. I mean, I don't think you'll run into that for a 3-day exercise, but, the art of this is ordering what you need now and trying to anticipate the reasonable needs that you will need tomorrow, without asking for, what's unreasonable needs, because if everybody asks, you know, for too much at the start, I mean, there's a real art and science to this, obviously. You have to deal with the problem you have in front of you. You need resources to deal with that problem. But, you know, in terms of, you know, it's kind of like, you know, if you have a problem and if you have a great incident management team locally in the state, you know, the first thing you almost need to think about resourcing is how you're going to manage this thing. So in terms of your, you know, your IMT headquarters type unit, are you resourced for that with your state resources or your local resources? And then, you know, as you build that up and start looking for the field resources, there is that art and science to ordering what you need absolutely now and trying to anticipate what your most immediate next needs would be, you know, for the tomorrow or the next day type, you know, activities, without unreasonably requesting too many things, because the same thing happens to us. If we go, you know, down, if we have to order a bunch of resources initially, we have to, you know, be able to justify this is an immediate need now and this is what we reasonably anticipate we're going to need in the near future.
Okay, so the next question, will there be a copy of this PowerPoint on SharePoint before next week, or can we get a copy by email? I think this recording Liz will make available shortly. If
yes, the recording will be available in a couple of days. Yeah.
The PowerPoint itself, we can put it on SharePoint, or I can send a direct copy if you need a direct copy of it.
That might be easier because I think that some of the state folks can't get into SharePoint unless they have the authenticate, so we may just want to send it to folks.
And the next question is, there capability to track resources in EMRS that come from outside VS or APHIS, for example, state resources? And by track, I assume placing orders and then accounting, checking in. Yes, the answer to that is yes, and we've done all that in the past. It depends on what you know, what folks want to do. You know, some local resources are just handled on their own, but if you want them, if you want to account for them and them to be in the system and show that they're assigned to the incident and all those things, yes, we can do that. But and you may place an order for resources, and some of it may end up being federal resources, filled with federal resources, and may be filled with state resources, depending on the situation. But we can put equipment, fleet, you know, any of that stuff can be entered into the system if we're tracking it and assigning it. So if you had state available resources that may be assigned to state or federal personnel and you want to keep track of it, yes, we have the ability to do all that. And that's all the written questions I have.
Are there any verbal questions in the queue?
If anyone would like to join the verbal question queue at this time, please press #2 on your telephone keypad. And there are no verbal questions at this time.
Okay. Well, at this point, if we have no other written questions, I would like to thank you again for joining us today. We also have 2 additional webinars scheduled in the next month. On May 22nd at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, we have several subject matter experts across USDA presenting on heart water disease. And on June 14th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Dr. Pam Zabel will present an overview of the swine industry. Those announcements will be going out in the next week. And I'd like to just wish you all to have a great rest of your day, and thanks again.
Thank you to our speakers and all in the audience for joining. Your call is now concluded, and you may disconnect.